Accounts Commission, which is being held in Glasgow. Public session of the meeting is, as always, being recorded, and the recording will be made available via the Commission's website. Got their microphones off. Good. Public session of the meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be made available via the Commission's website as soon as possible. There are members of the public in here today. There's very few people around genuinely tend to come, so welcome. And you're more than welcome to be participating in today's session by watching. I'd particularly like to acknowledge if there are representatives of Glasgow City Council watching online. As I know there are other council business taking place today, they're not actually in the room today. If anyone experiences any technical issues, please contact our support colleagues separately via Teams or by email to the address given in the calendar invite. Commission members, please keep your camera on throughout the meeting, but keep your microphones on mute. For others participating in the meeting, please keep your camera off, microphone on mute, except when it's your item. And can I make the usual plea for us to speak clearly and loudly, please, throughout the meeting for the benefit of those in the room and elsewhere. Make sure it's easy for the transcription and for people who've got maybe some slight hearing challenges. So item 1 of today's agenda is apologies for absence. Yeah?
We have no apologies today.
Good. Item 2, declarations of connection. I would like to declare a connection in relation to the Glasgow Best Value Report at items 5 and 11. As chair of the Wheatley Group until the end of September, I have a connection to the council through the city building joint venture. Given this connection, it was agreed that Andrew will step in to chair the session. Andrew's the deputy chair, and recusing myself from the discussions, any conclusions and decisions made by the Commission and any media relation to the report. Can I ask other members who have connections or interest regarding any item on today's agenda, please state their connection, whether they consider it material enough to recuse themselves. Jennifer.
I've got a connection to item 13, the Code of Audit to supplementary guidance as a chief exec of a public body that is subject to that guidance when it comes in, but I've taken advice and don't need to recuse myself. No.
Similar to item 13 as a member of a body that's audited by Audit Scotland.
Likewise, I'm the executive director of bodies that are audited by Audit Scotland.
Yeah, 2 declarations. Firstly, I'm a member, item 13, I'm a member of a body audited by Audit Scotland and the Best Value Audit of Glasgow. I have a connection with the previous chief executive, but neither do I have to recuse myself.
Nicola.
Similarly, sorry, as to others for item 13, I'm a member of a body audited by Audit Scotland.
Takes us to item 3 business. As normal, I'd like the Commission's approval for the order of business today. I propose items 10 to 15 are considered in private for the reasons set out in the agenda. As an exception, in the interest of time today, item 13 is supplementary guidance for the Code of Audit Practice. It has already been addressed by a correspondent ahead of today's meeting, and members agreed to endorse the guidance presentation to the board. Therefore, I propose that we do not need to consider that item today. Are members agreed on both those issues? Yes. Item 4, matters arising from the previous meeting. 20 minutes and matters arising from the previous meeting. Sarah.
Yes, so there were 2 actions coming from the last meeting. The first was that the brochure that was produced for MSPs on public audit in Scotland was circulated to members after the meeting, and the leaflet has also been adapted for use for general information to the general public on public audit in Scotland, and it's been included as part of the recruitment materials. And the other action was in relation to the Controller of Audit updating Commission members on audit delivery. The next time that will happen is next month in September and then November. So we've marked those in the agenda planner so you know when those are coming. And just I suppose one more note is that we did produce a note of the private session with Manager Council, and that has been published. It was agreed with the council and it has been published alongside the formal minute of the last meeting. To take any questions on the minute.
Members content with the minute? So that takes us to best value Glasgow City Council, paper which I will now be recusing myself. So I'll hand over to Councillor. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay. Thanks very much, Joe. And as colleagues know, item 5 is a statutory report by the Controller of Audit on best value in Glasgow City Council. The report draws attention to the findings from the Council's 24-25 annual audit report on how effectively it demonstrates best value. And the Commission has been asked to consider and endorse the Controller's report in this session, and will then consider in private later today how we wish to proceed. The Controller and the auditors are here to answer any questions that members have on the Controller's report and the annual audit report as it all relates to best value. I think we've got about around an hour and a quarter. We could possibly take a little bit more for this session because it is a significant large report concerning Scotland's biggest local authority. So, with that introduction outlined, I'll just hand over to Helen in the first instance as Controller of Audit, and she's joined by Stephen and Rachel from EY. Helena.
Thank you and good morning, everybody. And I welcome the opportunity to discuss my best value report on Glasgow City Council with the Commission today. And as the Deputy Chair has already mentioned, I'm joined by Stephen and Rachel from the audit team, and I thank them for all their work on the audit. The report covers a lot of ground, as you might expect, given the scale and complexity of the challenges a city like Glasgow faces. And against that backdrop, my report highlights that the Council has a clear strategic vision, has embedded transformation in its overall strategic plans, and there are strong examples of the Council working collaboratively to achieve its priorities. However, my report also highlights concerns raised by the auditor around the timeliness and balance of annual performance reports, governance, in particular matters raised within the annual governance statement, and the lack of a finalised workforce strategy and consistent council-wide staff engagement. In terms of financial management, it overspends in the last 6 years, with a net overspend in 24-25 of 45.7 million and reserves at their lowest level since 2018-19. The Council has taken steps to strengthen financial planning, and while still subject to audit, the 25-26 performance against budget is much improved, with a small underspend reported. However, my report highlights the significant financial pressures and challenges faced by the Council, notably in relation to homelessness, but also in relation to equal pay, the latter of which are currently not captured in its forecast budget of 109.7 million over 26-27 and 27-28. Sorry, that's the budget gap forecast. In this context, while recognising the complexity of the challenges facing the city and the external funding environment, the absence of a medium-term financial plan, which assesses the potential impacts of the issues the Council faces against its reserves position and its strategic priorities, is concerning. The Council must balance addressing financial sustainability risks with a range of competing demands. And of critical importance for the Council is the implementation of a revised pay and grading structure by April 2027, while concurrently replacing its finance system, changing how ICT is delivered, and responding to a significant number of outstanding audit recommendations in relation to governance, scrutiny, and performance management. And delivery of these matters will be fundamental in order for the Council to be able to demonstrate it is delivering best value for its communities. I'll conclude by highlighting that this report comes at a crucial time for the Council, with the Council's City Administration Committee due to consider updates later this month on pay and grading and the Council's financial outlook. And the team and I look forward to discussing this report in further with you.
Thanks very much, Helen. And as colleagues know, but just for the sake of those that are watching, our standard procedure for discussing these reports is to try and organise as best we can our lines of questioning into broad themes. And we've got 6 themes, which roughly sort of correlate to the sections in the Controller's covering report. And those 6 themes are financial management, financial sustainability, leadership and governance, citizen and community engagement, performance management and reporting, and then workforce. So I'm going to take each of those in turn, and one Commission member will lead off on each of those areas. And the first theme, as I've just said, is financial management. I'm going to turn to Angela for the first question.
Yeah. Thanks, Helena, for your report. Stephen and Rachel. It's a really comprehensive coverage of what's happening in Glasgow. Could I just ask by asking for some further expansion of the assurance that you have that leaders, both at executive and political level, fully recognise the financial risks and the scale of the financial challenges ahead?
Yeah, and I'll bring in Stephen and Rachel to share some of their reflections. But I think to start with, I'd highlight that following previous audit recommendations and elected member feedback, officers have made several changes to the way in which financial monitoring reports are presented to improve that transparency and focus on those key factors that elected members will need to focus on as part of their decision making. And I think an example of that is increased detail on the use of the budget support fund. But I'll bring in the team to talk a bit more about their conversations and observations, as well as how the council approaches managing financial risk as well.
Let me start. Good morning, everyone. So in terms of your question, last recent comprehensive update which the Director of Finance presented was on August 25, which was a broad outlook of the financial challenges, and that was presented not only through the political oversight group but also to council itself. As Helena mentioned, there is an update to that paper expected to go later this month. It sets again the line of the overall challenges facing at a high level of the authority. I think if we look at the risk register and the key risks that are identified within the risk register, then certainly financial sustainability and a number of the contributing elements of that are identified as significant risks. So I do believe that officers and members, based on papers that are being or have been and are being presented and the risk register, are aware of the significant challenges. There's a separate question about the unknowns, if you like, and the items at this current time that perhaps can't be as fully quantified as officers would ideally like. Thanks, Steve.
So yeah, in recognition of that, then what assurance can we have about the controls that are in place, so that the awareness is there? What's the action being taken to make sure that officers at all levels across the organisation are aware of their responsibility, their accountability to manage within the financial envelope that's allocated to them? And are you satisfied on the scheme of delegation and the controls that sit around that?
Yeah.
Sorry, Steve.
Yeah. So you touched on it there. Certainly as auditors, we're content that there is, the governance framework, and we highlight in our 24-25 annual audit report that the council does have the key elements of the required governance framework in place, and that does include the scheme of delegation. It does include the responsibilities being delegated to service holders as well for the management of budget and responsibility for delivering against budgets that are agreed. If we look, albeit unaudited, at the 25-26 position, as Helena mentioned in her opening remarks, you'll see that the surplus that is being reported is around about 1 million. So while over the past 4, 5, 6 years we have seen increasing deficits, one of the comments that we have made previously is the need for management to re-examine the baseline budgets, to get a realistic baseline budget, notwithstanding that in some services demand pressures are always going to be a challenge, but there is an ability to also manage demand pressures through innovative approaches to dealing with that demand. It would appear in the 25-26 budget that some re-baselining. So I don't have, as auditor, I don't have a concern over the absence of control.
And in terms of the overspend, which is quite significant for 24-25, particularly in relation to neighbourhood services, I think we see in the report. Again, what actions do you see that have taken place in the subsequent year that might give us assurance that things are turning a corner?
Yes, Stephen's already mentioned some of this already, and I think, as we've already highlighted, we have seen with the although unaudited 25-26 outturn, that that sort of stronger control over the budget. I think those overspends can be attributed to a variety of different reasons, you know, inflationary pressures as well as demand on services. And as Stephen's highlighted, part of what's is that building in those recurring overspends into the budget where appropriate, and then ensuring additional control of costs. I don't know.
No, nothing to add.
Thanks. Angela, go ahead.
Just one final
That's fine.
point from me, the budget support fund that you mentioned, Helena. So it was scheduled to have been reduced to nil by March 26. Did that happen? And if so, how do they plan to address any future budget gaps?
So again, that's unaudited at the moment, but I believe that the council reported that that fund was fully utilised in 25-26. You'll be aware that the fund was created as a result of fiscal flexibility in relation to service concessions, and the intention was to support the financial sustainability and implementation costs associated with those budget savings options, but has in reality been used to support homelessness pressures and the deficit position going forward. I think in terms of that future question around supporting the closing that funding gap, I think that's where we'd really point to the medium-term financial plan and the need for such a plan that would really set out the choices and the priorities and the options around that.
To do still a gap. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm sure we'll come back to that, the financial strategy when we get to financial sustainability, the next topic. Thanks, Angela. Just sticking with financial management. Ruth, did you have a follow-up on some of this?
Thank you. Just a couple of questions from me. Good morning. Obviously, the report highlights quite significant pressures on the finance team. I'm just wondering if we can say a bit more about resourcing and resilience in the team, particularly given some of the big issues that are coming over the hill in terms of pay reform and the new finance platform.
Thanks, and again, Stephen, I'll bring you in, but I think it's fair to say that you've highlighted that the key personnel have the experience and you know, demonstrate that strong working understanding of the council's arrangements, and that there has been turnover within the team and that that's been managed well. But I think, as the report highlights, there are some significant priorities coming ahead, and it's about how that's kept in the review.
Yes, I mean, in each of the 3 years of our annual audits, we've raised matters in relation to the capacity and capability. Particularly more recently, we saw some significant turnover within the finance team. I have to say, and as we've reported, the finance team have gone well with that, and the transition has gone well. Nonetheless, given the pressures, number of challenges, so as Helena talked about, whether that be in relation to the implementation of pay and grading, the new finance system, the ongoing complexity of financial reporting in local government, and some of the complexities that we've had to deal with, for example, around service concession accounting, most recently IFRS 16. And then on the horizon, we have, although still subject to consultation, some large proposed changes to the financial reporting framework in local government. So the council team, finance team, had a lot to deal with. I don't see on the horizon some of that getting any easier. Officers recognise that and have agreed to keep under review capacity and capability to that emerging environment.
I think that being part
I don't think so directly. I mean, I think at the current time, I think there's something around 34 recommendations standing. You'll see from the 24-25 annual audit report that there has been progress made by officers and implemented those recommendations. The nature of those recommendations very much there are a number of the themes within the Board of Audit's report here today. And by the very nature, we're strategic in focus and will take a number of years. So I don't have any concerns that management aren't appropriately focused on the recommendations. Any of the more straightforward ones to implement, I think, are being driven forward. But as I say, the very nature are a number of them will take some years to implement and are linked to things like the new finance system, for example, or workforce strategy. Clearly, in relation to workforce, I know we'll come back to what the priority is, obviously, pay and grade.
Just finally as well, if I could just ask a bit about the new finance system. Obviously, there are always risks with changes on that scale. So is the council planning for that in terms of resources? Are you aware of any kind of checks that they might be doing with other councils? They have been monitoring that resource implication going.
So clearly, the change of finance system, from memory, current support for the current system expires towards the end of 2027, and therefore there is a strategic imperative to the new finance system. This has been under consideration by the council and officers for some time. There's business case process and governance around that, and they have identified significant numbers of internal members of staff to take forward and implement the new system. But I think importantly, using third-party support in terms of the implementation, and that third-party support, I think, brings that insight from the implementation of similar finance systems, not just here in Scotland, not just with local government, but also more broadly across the UK. And I think that's important.
That might take some of the pressure off the internal resource as well to have that support. So that's helpful, thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. We're going to move on to financial sustainability in a minute, but just before we do, is there any further questions on the sort of general issues of financial management that any colleagues want to pursue? If it's okay, then we'll move on to the second theme, which I highlighted at the start of this topic or this report, and it's financial sustainability. And I'll turn to Derek first to lead us off on that.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. And thanks very much for the reports, both Helena's report and the annual audit report. I'd have to say it's one I find these are the highest quality report I've looked at in terms of the presentation. I mean, it's a long read, a challenging read, but I think it was easy to work the way through. So I did value that. One thing and maybe just to make that link from financial management to financial sustainability, one thing I always look for in either a best value report or annual report is a 3-word statement. And I've read the report a couple, and I haven't found it in terms of Glasgow. And that 3-word phrase I'm looking for is sound financial management. So I want to tease out a bit. We've obviously covered the financial management in terms of the ongoing day-to-day monitoring. But one of the key elements of that financial sustainability is obviously having a medium-term financial strategy. And you and I have had a discussion a few times, Helen, on what we actually mean by that. So I'm keen to tease out what you think is missing, because what comes in the report, the council's obviously done some financial modelling and projections, at least over the next couple of years, which seems a wee bit light in terms of looking longer term, but I'm conscious that the council's facing some substantial financial challenges, which are probably, if not unique to Glasgow, certainly have a higher prominence there, which comes with significant risk. But I want to tease it, is it getting the basics right? Because what was the feeling coming through the report was I think some of the core basics are maybe not at the level that you might expect it to see. So in terms of the medium-term financial strategy, to get there, what does the council need to do that it's not currently doing? And in terms of looking for some assurances about budget modelling, are they modelling different scenarios rather than just come up with a figure that the budget gap is X? What's what's backing that up? What are the modelling, or to get assurances that they are modelling, and what factors they've taken into account, or perhaps what they haven't at this stage included within that?
Thanks, Derek.
A lot within that, and I'll start, and then I'll bring in Stephen as well. I think it's probably worth recognising as well what the council are doing and have done. So as the report sets out, in November 2023, the council agreed a high-level medium-term budget strategy, which was for the period 2024 to 2027, and they agreed a 3-year budget in February 2024. In August last year, they produced a financial outlook covering the period 2026 to 2028, which they presented to the City Administration Committee. And again, I think that demonstrates that improvement in financial planning for the future. But as you and I have had a debate about before, it's not sort of that 10-year medium-term financial strategy that we might be hoping for, setting out those longer-term financial planning, so the different scenarios, different ranges, and the choices, crucially, that I think they have to make, and the implications of those. As I've mentioned already, the council is working on that 10-year outlook, and Stephen might want to come in a bit more about that. And I'll also bring Stephen in to talk about modelling and the different scenarios that the council do consider.
So,
Okay, thank you. So Derek, I took away 2 elements of your question. One was around almost the financial reporting, budget monitoring, and you'll see within our annual audit report that we have commented over the past 3 years on a number of elements of the information that's presented to elected members, and how easy that is for elected members to interrogate and scrutinise. And I think a good example of some of the commentary we've got in our annual reports was around the kind of capital report that was going to Finance and Audit Scrutiny Committee. I think that was some 80 odd pages, and therefore you could argue that that's a bit impenetrable, challenging at least for members to be able to see the key indicators and then to be scrutinised on that basis. I think, to be fair, management have responded to some of our comments around budget monitoring type reports, and that will be a continuing journey, clearly, going forward. In terms of the medium-term financial plan, I think just to build on what Helena said, I wouldn't want the Commission to think that the Council do nothing in this space, and I think that's really important. In terms of some of the reports and work, there has been the overview of the economic and the Scottish outlook, which has gone into some of the reports that Helena referenced. There is projections and assumptions paired around key areas between 26 and 28, and then some of the anticipated funding movements are taken into account as well, spending pressures. And then there's clearly in the paper that went in August 25, the key financial risks were highlighted going forward. I think from our perspective, in terms of some of the gaps and what we would like to see in a medium-term financial plan, are some detailed financial projections rather than just the impacts on the movement of funding and spending. Also, I think there's an opportunity to improve the linkage between the overall strategy and some of the supporting strategies and the financial plan overall, so that golden thread is clear. Again, quantified savings and transformation programs, how those are built into the longer term and what the expectation is in terms of their delivery. And then some more detail around the assessment of the funding and demand risks. I think reserves, clearly we've talked already about reserves and the relative position of the Council's general fund. So I think in that plan, I would like to see more information on reserves and what the profile of those look like over the period. And then the actions which the Council are proposing, both in terms of savings or transformation or service reform, around what we would are aiming to do to address those gaps and what those options look like clearly for elected members to consider and make decisions. And then I think there's something about clearer scenario planning. Again, I'm not saying all that doesn't happen, but it's about where it happens and the degree of scrutiny and that information that's also in the public domain, which I think is important.
No, that's really helpful, Stephen. Thank you. I mean, I suppose one of the things I picked up was that they wouldn't make any assumption of council tax as part of that sort of modelling, which seems to differ in approach from other council. And I accept those are political decisions that are made at the time, but just one observation to add to that list. But no, that I think that's really helpful, and I know multiple will come in about Stephen, so I'm happy to.
Thanks, Dick. So, Malcolm, I think if you wanted to follow up on savings and reserves that Stephen just referenced.
Yeah, thanks. Just to sort of dig a bit for that. In terms of the delivery of savings, I think an improvement in 2025 in delivering the targeted savings. Just wondered how is that a one-off, or how sustainable is that moving forward, given the level of challenges that the council clearly?
Yeah, and I'm happy to provide a bit more context around that, actually. So over the last 10 years, the council has estimated that it's delivered 360 million of savings. So that then, I suppose, puts the current and future savings into context. And already mentioned, my report highlights that in 24-25, there's been that improvement in the delivery of savings, with 92% of the target savings delivered. Again, not audited yet, but for the 25-26 budget, again, I think it's showing that 92.5% of the identified savings have also been delivered. So I think it's showing that improvement, but obviously within that context, savings can get more challenging to deliver.
I guess the question for me is how sustainable is that going to be? You know, it's difficult to do that, but you get a sense that this is something that can continue.
I mean, I think that's the big question, I think, isn't it? And I think ultimately, again, as Stephen outlined, that's the kind of thing that you'd hope and expect to be drawn out more in terms of the medium-term financial strategy as well.
Can I just move on? Sorry, were you? Yeah, I just want to move on to look at reserves in a bit more detail now, and I think the report states that they're now at the lowest level since 2019. Although I think the unaudited, the latest unaudited accounts would suggest there's a slight improvement in that, but they're still below the 2%. How is the council intending to return, or do they intend to return it to the 2%?
So just to clarify, in terms of figures, so the 24-25 position at the end of March 25 was an earmarked reserves balance of 1.2% of net and budgeted expenditure. Again, the unaudited figures, but the most recent figures at 31st March 2026 have that balance at 1.9%. So obviously getting closer to that 2%. And again, I think as Stephen's already outlined, it's within that medium-term financial strategy setting out there the implications and implications around reserves. I think that
the concerning thing is that there's a reliance on the reserves to help fill the budget gap. The budget support fund, as we've already discussed, has been fully, or appears to have been fully utilised. So, I mean, do they have a time scale, or is there a time scale for, or a target for when they would hope to be back within their stated 2% of?
So subject to the unaudited financial statements being audited, then they are moving quite close back to that 2%. Clearly, there's some more work to do. We haven't seen the council's financial paper that we're expecting to be presented soon to the council, but my expectation is that there would be some information in there that would show that certainly in discussions with the Director of Finance, they're very cognizant of the importance of having a sustainable level of reserves to deal with these unexpected shocks that can come along, and keen to return to set that balance. And as I say, some progress all appears already to have been made.
Thanks, Malcolm. Christine, did you want to come in on this issue?
On financial sustainability.
Yep.
So I'm one of the few members who's been here during the previous section 102s. So my question really is relating to financial implications of that which is yet to be settled. And also I'm just trying to understand why it's taken so long to get to this place.
Stephen?
Yeah, so clearly the work in relation to equal pay at Glasgow City Council has been ongoing, as you illustrate, for a considerable number of years. In 2023, you'll recall there's a memorandum of understanding signed with the trade unions that set the date of April 27. Up until that point, there would be future claims brought in relation to equal pay. I think based on the Section 102 reports that the Commission has had over the years, and I think there's at least a few there that have come to the Commission. One thing that I would underline is the complexity of the programme that officers have been going through. If you and the job matching, I think also safe to say that not all of the matters which have taken time to work through have been directly in the control the council as well. But just for illustration, I think there are some 19,000 primary indicators, 2,500 to 3,000 secondary indicators, and then the process that had to be gone through by officers with input from the trade unions to go through an assimilation or matching exercise, and an assessment and valuation. So a very, very complex process. There is the intention that there will be reports going later this month with an update to the council, and certainly in our engagement with both senior officers, including the Director of Finance and the Chief Executive, there is a real focus on ensuring that there is progress to deliver an arrangement by the April 27 timeline by which the memorandum of understanding expires.
So is it your view that they'll meet that deadline?
I wish I could give a view, but I can't give a view, unfortunately, because the discussions are ongoing between officers and the trade unions. As I say, not all of the factors are within the gift of the council, and therefore I can say that I see officers working very hard to reach a resolution on this matter. But I can't give any assurances that that timeline will be delivered.
And just one wee follow-up, if you don't mind, just on the financial implications after April. Has there been any work done on modelling and how that plays into, what might still come in terms of that financial obligation that they will have?
Yeah. I mean, certainly from the audit perspective, if you look at our 24-25 report, clearly from an accounting perspective, we're very interested, let alone our broader responsibilities here. And we report in there that, that it was unable to be quantified. And clearly we haven't received anything from officers since with any quantification at this date.
We don't know.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Christine. So it's fair to say, Helena, Stephen, Rachel, that I know you can't give a view, but the senior officers and senior politicians are aware of the urgency and the priority to try and resolve this prior to April 2027. Mm-hmm. And actually that also just bookmarks the end of an electoral cycle as well. So it's obvious that they understand the urgency is what you're saying, but although you can't give a view on whether they'll achieve it, they understand how serious the achieving that target is.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
Thanks. So sticking on in the general broad area of financial stability, Jennifer, I think you had some questions on transformation.
I do, and it's already been mentioned, but I just wanted to pick up, Helena,
In your report, you talk about the fact that there isn't clear alignment between transformation projects and financial plans. So I'd be kind of keen to understand whether there's any sort of improvement in that area and there is starting to be a clearer alignment. And as a sort of secondary question, my reading of your report is that the transformation activity in the council is very much focused on addressing poverty. So I'm interested to understand how are there other strategic priorities playing into supporting their financial sustainability, and are they identifying other opportunities for transformation to support financial sustainability? So it's a sort of three-part question, whether the financial alignment's getting better, whether it is broader than poverty, and how they're making sure they're sort of not leaving any stone unturned in how transformation can support their financial sustainability objectives.
Thanks, Nat. I'll bring Stephen in to talk a bit more about the alignment with transformation and the financial strategy. I think we've already talked about, and I feel like a bit of a broken record. I think that is something, again, for the medium-term financial strategy to be articulated. But Stephen can talk a bit more about the audit findings in that area. In terms of the priorities, I suppose I'd bring you back to the council's strategic plan, which is mission-based and focused around 4 grand challenges. Now, one of those is around reducing poverty and inequality in communities. The second is around increasing opportunity and prosperity for all communities. The third is around climate change and a just transition to net zero. And then the fourth is around delivering essential services in a sustainable and innovative and efficient way. And the council reports progress against all of those grand challenges. And in its 2025 progress report, it actually reported that its strongest progress was in the third and fourth of those challenges. So, but I suppose more generally in that question around reporting on progress, because transformation has been embedded within the strategic plan, it's the reporting on the strategic plan and the governance around the strategic plan through which you can see that progress against their transformation priority. Makes sense. But Stephen, Rachel, do you want to say a bit more about that alignment, I think, point?
Yeah, absolutely, thank you. So in terms of that alignment piece, while the council did streamline a bit more of a focus on poverty, the rationale for doing so is that actually cuts across a lot of the strategic priorities that they've already. So if you take, I suppose, the impact that poverty can have on education, on social work, cuts right across. So it's not that they're just focusing on one area, but they're recognising actually by focusing on that area, it's going to have that wider benefit across their strategic priorities. And as Lena says, in terms of the financial implications of doing so, in our thematic review, we did identify that there could be better linkage in terms of quantifying that financial benefit. Obviously, a lot of that financial benefit might impact partner bodies and not just the local authority. It is very much a community approach they're taking through the planning partnership there on that one.
Thanks very much, Rachel.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, and just maybe finally on this broad area, Mike, did you have some questions around homelessness and IJB?
Certainly a very complex set of challenges, very clearly articulated, I think, in the papers. I had questions on homelessness and the IJB. Overall, is it fair to say your concerns about medium-term planning relate, one, to transparency, and two, to the clarity on where the funding might come from? I'm on the latter particularly interested in it to be measures which have addressed previous issues by shifting by either finding short-term solutions like using the trust fund, or this year shifting business money and the use of sale and leaseback. Read in some implication that there might be some sort of rescheduling. Scheduling is technically the correct word, but a way of again shunting costs into the future. How big a concern is that? On homelessness, as one of the big pressures, it would be helpful to get a sense of the trend that we're seeing here. In other words, how big is this risk assessed by the council going forward, and whether you have any information on the engagement with other authorities around the funding of what is a pressure which is to a large extent outside the council's own control. I'm conscious on the IJB. There's not much in the paper at the IJB other than around homelessness. How far the overall assessment of financial capability is council's exposure to the affected, or is that an additional potential pressure?
Thanks, Mike. There's quite a bit there. Do you want to?
There's a lot in there. We'll cherry pick between us. and I'll start, and I'll hopefully start. I might start at the back actually, and we can work forward, because I think on the IJB, and I'll give some warning that I'm going to come to Stephen on the funding points and the homelessness. Pick up on the IJB. So the council's budget does reflect the cost pressures arising from their anticipated contribution to the IJB, so meeting their commitments. So that is factored within the numbers. I suppose just to give you a bit more context on the IJB's financial outlook, which as you'll be aware for the sector overall is challenging. So the 24-25 annual audit report projected a 118 million funding gap in the 3-year period to 2027-28. But in recognition of those challenges, the IJB has recently commenced a prioritisation exercise, a process to identify the services that are having the greatest impact and value. And they did deliver in 24-25 a 26.6 million savings programme, which has supported an underspend against their operation budget and allowed the IJB to rebuild their general reserves balance, which is now sitting at 1.4% of net expenditure. So that's not to downplay I suppose, the challenges, but you'll also be aware of the position across the world sector, and actually articulated here and how that compares. But I'll bring in Ethan and Rachel on homelessness and the funding point, if that's okay.
Thanks, Stephen.
So I mean, just to build slightly on, should be assured that there is a close working relationship between and the council and the IJB are fully cited on the pressures. In terms of homelessness, then the reported costs for 25-26, I think, are in the region of about 38 million, and costs are set to or projected to increase to somewhere in the region of around about 56 million in 26-27, and again around 90 million in 27-28. So the pressures that Glasgow faces from homelessness are significant, particularly see that in the context of some of the previously forecast financial challenges and gaps that I referred to. And then in terms of the funding piece, Rachel to comment, you referenced the sale and leaseback and the ongoing revenue costs, and you're absolutely right. I think those are in the region of about 34 million per year, and that clearly will run for a number of years. The council, through Scottish Government, has also been able to access some financial flexibilities historically, some of the areas, but really homelessness alone, the scale of the challenge is significant.
Just to build on that, the council has been relying on what measures in terms of their ability to respond to some challenges that you've touched on. So I mean, talked about budget support funds before, which has largely been used to support the council's deficits and That's a very big pressure that has been used for in 25-26. And then for 26-27, that 56 million that Stephen talked about as a capital grant flexibility that is getting used to support that cost. So it brings us back to the medium-term financial plan point and the importance of that in terms of that look ahead and being able to sustainable measures to respond to these pressures. But they are all pressures very unique to Glasgow in terms of what they're responding.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. Mike, do you want to come back?
I might refer that agent with what you're saying is that the capital programme for the current year
There isn't a permanent agreement with the Scottish Government on how homelessness will be covered. There are ongoing conversations between the council.
Right, thanks, Rachel. And Christy, did you want to go
A
ahead?
very quick question about the homelessness budget figures that you've just spoken about. Are those across the council and the IJB, or are they just housing related? They don't, because I mean the council is responsible for housing, IJB is addiction services, health, mental health, that etc.
Yeah, so the council has chosen to fund homelessness on behalf of the IJB, so that's a pressure that the council has assumed. So it does cover the full pressure.
So that those figures are across the two entities. Okay, I was trying to understand the council's obligation from the housing perspective in terms of finance. Is there any way of picking that out?
I don't have that information
Okay.
at hand.
Okay, thanks. Now, Christine, I think that, unless somebody shouts me, I think that probably draws the queries under the second section, financial sustainability, to a close. We spent a little bit more time on that. I hope that's okay with colleagues. It's obviously at the core of the challenges that face Glasgow City Council. So I'm going to move us on then, if that's okay, to the third area. This is 3 of 6, remember? Leadership and governance, also pretty crucial to the challenges that face Glasgow City Council. And I'm going to turn to Ruth to kick us off on that.
Was a bit about leadership capacity and how resources being prioritised. You've obviously got the really extreme complexity of the grading reform work, ICT transformation and the finance platform, which all huge, very complex projects. How is leadership sort of prioritising how they work across these areas, and has any work been done, staff capacity and also capability in these areas? The finance platform, that there is some external help with that, but
yeah, there's probably quite a bit within that to unpick. So we're going to bring in Stephen and Rachel to share some of their observations, I think. And it's probably worth also just being clear on the capacity point, whether you're thinking specifically about leadership or wider, I suppose, organisation-wide capacity. And I think this is something that we've obviously highlighted in my report, actually, the range of challenges facing the council, and that is a leadership challenge. Probably worth stepping back a little bit as well, just to note the senior leadership restructure in the summer of last year, which creates a corporate leadership team which has that strategic oversight, and then a revised governance framework that sits around that includes steering groups, a political oversight group, to ensure that, and suppose that strategic oversight of the council priorities that we've just been talking about. I think, as we highlighted in the report, it's too early to say really the impact and the effectiveness of that restructure, but that's something that Stephen and Rachel might be able to share some observations on. I think in terms of that capacity point and the bit that I was just sort of trying to unpick, whether it's leadership capacity or organisational capacity, because obviously my report highlights the extensive workforce planning arrangements that the council does have in place and that reflect the size and complexity, I think, of the group and the different arrangements and governance around that, but does, I suppose, highlight that strategic gap of that overarching strategic workforce strategy, but just to provide, I suppose, that reassurance that there are those service planning arrangements any of those capacity points and looking at things like succession planning as well. But Stephen, Rachel, I don't know if you want to come in.
Yeah, I mean, the points that are raised are ones that we've flagged as risks in our annual reporting in terms of that capacity, and ones that officers are very much aware of. And I think what we have seen, and clearly the 25-26 audit will be helpful coming, is relative prioritisation and decisions being taken about timelines. One of the risks we did highlight was pay and grading, new finance system, and that they were running on very similar timescales. Now, there has been action taken to revise the timeline for the new finance system. But that be eases, I would say, rather than resolves some of that pressure. So I think the risks that you highlight, we recognise, and I think officers also recognise.
You touched on it briefly, but there has been updates for us in terms of the leadership restructure and culture issues as well that kind of emanated from the recent Section 102 on the exit packages. Is there anything you can tell us about things might be changing in that area, or if there's a new approach there, or when we might hear a kind of further update on how things are changing and looking?
Yes, my report touches on the wider culture. Culture is such a difficult thing to measure and quantify, actually. But as set out in the report, the council has issued the Improvement Services Culture Checklist to all staff in service or ALIO management teams. And I think what that will do is help create that baseline, I suppose, from which you can then look at that progress. I think the outputs from that exercise have been considered at a development session that was held in June. And then there are further sessions expected to take place over the course of the year, but I'm not sure we have anything further to add at this point. But I suppose in terms of that question around measurement, I think that's the aim, is that baseline.
I mean, thanks, Ruth. I'm sure it's something that auditors won't want to comment on, but obviously just to put on the record that we're clearly aware that under leadership as well, there's going to be a change in political leadership coming up. We understand on the 10th of September, that it's obviously crucial that that golden thread that you touched on a few times, Stephen, continues politically as well through the leadership change. And the Commissioner are aware of that. It's not something we can control, but we're aware it's about to happen. We understand on the 10th of September. But Mike, did you want to come in on this general thing?
Could you just say what the new timings are for financial? But you said they've been rephased.
The council are looking at rephasing them at the moment. They haven't confirmed an exact date of implementation, but they did always recognise that these projects were likely to overlap. They wanted to go ahead with the finance just because of the amount of work involved, and then they were always going to review it when more was available on pay and grading.
Thanks, Rachel. Christy, did you have a follow-up on this specific point?
Just a very
Malcolm.
quick question on the leadership. On paragraph 26 of the report, you say that the corporate leadership team leads on the key priorities, and it says what it includes. But what it doesn't say is equal pay within those priorities and the pay and grading. Is that being dealt with at that level? Is that specific question on that? And the other thing is also following up audit recommendations, because throughout the report we've referred to the fact that recommendations have been made and not followed up on. So is that also a priority for that corporate leadership team? Especially important given that there's going to be changes of individual personnel within.
So,
Stephen.
Yeah.
So in terms of the pay, absolutely, I can confirm that that's at the most senior level of the council. And then in terms of the audit recommendations, as I touched on slightly earlier, if you look at the audit recommendations that are sitting there, there's some around financial control, financial sustainability, ICT, governance, performance management and workforce. And necessarily there are some of those which appropriately are sitting at the strategic level, corporate leadership team, and there are some others which are more finance focused. So I am content that those are getting the correct focus, the ones that need to be a corporate leadership team versus the ones that
Thanks
need
for
to be
that.
sitting in the.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. And Malcolm, you have some queries around the general theme of leadership as well.
Yeah, I just wanted the governance and scrutiny arrangements. So we've had improved governance arrangements following previous audits. I just wondered if you could maybe say a bit more about that, and in your view, are they sufficiently robust to ensure that the weaknesses that we've seen previously don't reoccur?
Can I just double check, is that in relation to the annual governance statement and the city buildings?
No, I was going to come on to say, Bill, I was thinking more in terms of the
Audit and Scrutiny Committee.
Yes.
Yeah, so again, I'll bring Stephen in to talk a bit about his observations actually as well, but I think as the report highlights, there has been some of that turnover in membership. I think that's been driven by individual circumstances, but the council has got self-assessment arrangements in place, as well as independent assessments of committee effectiveness. I think auditors have previously reported that there is scope for the committee to enhance that scrutiny, and perhaps you want to come in and say a little bit more about that, and then particularly elected member training around scrutiny.
Yeah. So we have made observations in terms of the level of, I suppose, scrutiny and engagement at Finance and Audit Scrutiny Committee. And recognising the change in membership, there was a training seminar held March earlier this year. However, only 4 members attended that, so there has been additional plans in place to hold additional sessions, and also some additional suggestions about greater member attendance rather than attending virtually. So I make the observation, and I think Lena's report makes the observation, that I think there is scope for member scrutiny to be improved, not just at finance and audit scrutiny, but generally.
Malcolm, did you say you wanted to come back on another element of?
Yeah, I was going to cover the recommendations, but you've already covered that. And to Christine's question, can I turn to the council group and the city building situation? Maybe give us an update on the position there, and again an assessment of the new governance arrangement.
Are you going to pass straight to Stephen, I think, for?
So let me start from the position of the financial statements, and then we can go down, if you like, into city building and what's been happening there. So for the last 3 years where we've been appointed as external auditor, the group financial statements, the opinion on the group financial statements have been modified as a result of city building, and that relates to whistleblowing matters that were reported. Management and the Wheatley Group commissioned a review. That review identified a number of recommendations, and those recommendations have been implemented and being monitored by city building. In relation to 25-26, city building and the auditors have been working to make up the delays, as it were, and we are expecting, we have issued group instructions to the auditors, so we are expecting to have audited financial statements for 25-26. The opinion for 25-26 from me on the group financial statements will continue to be modified, because clearly that modification will take a couple of years to roll out. So in terms of the financial reporting at city building, there has been improvements, and they are slowly catching up, which is helpful. And then in terms of identifying the governance matters that were identified, then again, there has been progress, and progress continues to be made. I think importantly, however, the internal auditors, in their opinion, and governance statement for 24-25, the council also draws out the position in relation to not only progress, but some further work that requires to be done.
Yeah, I mean, can we be assured that, you know, we won't find similar weaknesses elsewhere in the group that have been addressed in the or is
I'm not sure that Stephen's going to say you can be sure.
until I've done an audit, and then I'm not going to provide that assurance. Clearly, the council has a complex group structure. They have arrangements in place. We have identified through the 24-25 report some opportunities to enhance linkages, particularly in relation to the SEC and some of the challenges that have been experienced there. So what I can say is that officers have taken the matters that were identified, taken them very seriously, and have worked to resolve those matters.
Yeah, well, that's fine. I mean, that's kind of level I wasn't expecting.
Right, thanks, Malcolm. Just sticking with governance for a couple more minutes. I think Derek, you had a few questions around ICT strategy.
Yeah, just specifically about ICT governance, because you'd obviously highlighted a number of concerns about that. I noticed elsewhere in the report that the council was moving, or it has moved to a multi-player model for its IT. So I just wondered what the rationale for that is, and does it alleviate your concerns, or does it potentially increase the reserves in terms of that variety, increasing the range of provision of various elements to that? So it'd be interesting to tease that out a bit more.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much we've got on the rationale. It was obviously subject to a business case that was presented to the City Administration Committee, and on the back of that, a preferred delivery model selected. And that business case will have evaluated the different models, taking into account the risks associated with them, as well as optional delivery requirements. I don't know if there's anything more that you'd want to say, particularly in terms of the governance or the.
In terms of the business case itself, got the standard consideration it can be of that nature in terms of evaluating the different models, assessing the risks of those models, and obviously the financial costs involved with each of them as well. So we've got no specific concerns in that area in terms of whether the council evaluated it when they were making it.
It's related to that one. Yeah, it's related. So, risks did they look specifically at things like the cybersecurity risks of having multiple suppliers and both. Often it's harder to get integrated data management when you've got multiple suppliers. So I'm aware they will have looked at financials, but have they looked at some of those more operational aspects in deciding that?
Yeah, I'll bring Rachel in, but
yes, I understand that they did consider the wider aspects. That contract.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks, Rachel. Derek, you okay on that? Because I think unless MD shouts at me, that draws the sort of leadership and governance to a close. So I'm going to move us on to the fourth topic area, which is citizen and community engagement. I think Nicola, you will lead us off on questions on this area.
Thank you, and thanks very much for the reports. So in terms of citizen and community engagement, the Controller's report indicates that some progress has been made in this area. I wondered if there was a bit more that could be said about the strategic plan 22 to 27, which set out the approach to embedding community engagement. And is there examples that could be brought forward around some of the action that's been taken in that area?
yeah, so I'm happy to kick off. So as you said, that the strategic plan sets out the council's approach to embedding community engagement and gives we've given a couple of examples already around sort of consultation on the refurbishment of George Square, engagement with foster kinship carers and equality groups. I think the council also delivers regular engagement through household surveys, budget consultation and targeted participation projects. And then I think within the transformation thematic as well, we give a couple of sort of examples too around that community engagement and participation. But I don't know if Rachel wants to provide any more examples.
I mean, in terms of probably the best examples as Leah touched on are probably from the last year's thematic review in terms of that work that the council are doing around poverty. So a couple of the case studies in there talks with Glasgow Helps being one example, which is a multi-partner approach where individuals can approach any partner organisation and get support that way. And I think that's a really good example of both considering frontline services and how the council are working with citizens, but also how they're working with their partners as well on that. In terms of how they've assessed that, there's also been a good example against Tell Your Story, which is where the partners have went out to both organisations that are delivering some of these services, but also with individual families that are impacted, and actually getting them to talk about their story, and they're using that to inform how they shape the strategy as well moving forward. Yeah, they're doing an awful lot of work in that area, and I think the poverty is probably the best example. There are numerous more that we could talk about as well.
Thanks, Rachel. Nicola, did you want to come back on any of that?
I guess, yeah, thank you, that's helpful. So that probably already answers some of the follow-up areas around engagement in practice. So you've answered that already. I guess turning then to community engagement in local areas, because what's been described as that focus around the poverty actions and then specific areas of engagement around George Square and with equalities groups. But in terms of local wards and local governance structures, could you say a wee bit more about both the structures that support engagement in local communities, geographic communities, the wards, etc. And then linked to that, you see in the report that there's investment across the 23 wards of £1 million in community participatory projects. Is there a sense of how the impact of that investment is being measured? That would be around £44,000 per ward. So it would be good to hear a bit about how confident the council is about the impact of that investment.
Thanks, Nicola.
And I'll bring Rachel in, I think, particularly to talk about that neighbourhood infrastructure improvement fund. I think there are some other examples as well that are highlighted in some of the other thematics around community choices platform, which is about enabling residents to discuss local issues and vote on participatory budgets. Centre for Civic Innovation, where the council team is working with residents to co-design responses to city challenges, and then also a City Changemakers scheme, which is a neighbourhood programme around testing community-led responses to climate as well. So I think hopefully that gives a bit more of a flavour of some of them. But Rachel, do you want to come in on the neighbourhood investment? Improvement fund.
Yeah, so the Neighbourhoods Infrastructure Improvement Fund was set up to allow communities to have a bit more say in terms of investment in areas, and that was primarily through the area partnership forums, was mainly decisions could be made around how that funding was used and assessing the benefits of it. It is an area we're currently looking at in terms of the asset management thematic review, which we're just finalising at the moment, so that we'd be able to report more on that.
Okay, Nicola.
Yeah.
Thanks, colleagues. Mike, did you want to come in on this general area?
To make sure I understood, you're saying this money is actually effectively to run the administering of more effective engagement.
So it's allowing communities to decide how some money can be spent in their local area. So it's giving the communities a bit more empowerment in terms of actually deciding how that funds can be used.
This money.
No, it's that money specifically.
Okay, Mike. Okay, Nicola, on that area. Any other query? If there's no other query on citizen community engagement, I'm not seeing any. I'm going to move us on then to this fifth area, which is performance management reporting. And Carol, I think you were going to kick us off on this broad points.
Yeah, so it's really around the SPI direction. Obviously, that's very important to the Accounts Commission, particularly this year as we're looking at new SPI direction going forward. But can you give the reasons for the non-compliance to it for 3 consecutive years, and whether leadership really recognise the importance of it? And linked to that, the fact that the performance framework seems to have taken a long time to deliver, and I know it was due in April 26 for the report, and the framework in May 26, and whether they actually did deliver. So, because they're all kind of linked.
Probably bring the team in just to talk through the different steps around that compliance.
Yeah. So I think fair to say in the 3 years where we've expressed an opinion, the performance report that you're referring to has only been available in one of those audit years, which was 23-24. In terms of the factors which have contributed to a number of our recommendations and comments that we've made over the years, clearly has been system limitations, and that's been a key factor. I think there's also been capacity limitations well. And then in the one report that was published within the timeline to allow us to review it as part of the audit process, we have made commentary around the balanced nature of that report. It is an area that is recognised by officers, and April 25, the 24-25 report was published. So as part of the 25-26 external audit, we'll clearly look at that. And also officers have committed to publish the 25-26 report by September. So again, we ought to be able to look at that one as part of the 25-26 audit, which is due, and we are due to report on the audit in December this year. So it'll be helpful, and that will give us some evidence about how management have responded to the challenges that we've raised, and the format and content of the report.
Thank you. And then a follow on the LGBF indicators. How are they being utilised across the council, and do you feel it's been effective?
Yeah, Rachel, I didn't mention.
So on an annual basis, the council does present the LGBF indicators to the Operational Performance and Delivery Scrutiny Committee, and also the Finance and Audit Scrutiny Committee get them as well. In terms of how then they're embedded at a lower level, they do then go down in terms of different service areas, and then they're monitored at a more local level, if you like, in terms of, and what they'll really focus on is those indicators that are out with appropriate tolerances, so really focusing on those ones which are outliers in the data, and they've got a strategic performance group that then monitors that overall in terms of how then.
And within that, do they have a sort of strategic overview where they, they invest more in some measures than others, which link to then the strategic priorities? And if they do you see that the ones that are improving are the ones that have had more investment, and that are not linked strategically have other ones that are doing less well?
Very good question. I mean, in terms of how they looked at a total level, we will absolutely link through their annual performance reports in terms of how they're going to do strategic priorities with LGBF indicators. In terms of that direct correlation in terms of investment, I don't think we'd be able to comment on it at this point in time.
But just to add to that, and Rachel, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the council are doing some work with the improvement service, which is to better understand some of the benchmarking indicators, and specifically those areas where they have poor performance or outliers, to better understand that as well. So I think that's an extra piece of work that they're also doing in that space.
Okay, Carol. Yep. Thanks. Anything else on performance management and reporting, colleagues? If not, Helena, Stephen and Rachel are going to be delighted to know we're coming to our sixth and final theme, which is workforce. And Jennifer, you're going to lead us off on this one.
Hopefully going to be quite quick, because I've really got two things I want to pick up on. The workforce strategy is the first one, and then staff satisfaction is the second. I can pick up on the workforce strategy first. Helena, you comment in your report there isn't currently a standalone workforce or people strategy, and I read that work is underway to develop one, should be expected in April 27, but I just wonder, A, do we understand why there was a delay or is a delay? And secondly, in the absence of a strategy, how can we be assured that the council is making good decisions about its workforce needs? And in particular, whether we can be assured that not having a strategy isn't incurring extra cost in the short term because they're having to make potentially more costly decisions around filling workforce gaps and things. So I think if we can just talk a little bit about how the lack of a strategy is or is not impacting on council's decisions around the workforce, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, and I bring the team, but I suppose I alluded to this already, in that although the council don't have a single standalone workforce strategy that underpins the council's strategic plan, which was the recommendation. There are, and as set out in paragraph 56 of my report, there are arrangements around service planning, workforce planning boards, and a corporate workforce board that look at those issues at sort of that level. But it's that bringing it together, I suppose, which is the key recommendation, which would then support the council's response to the strategic changes, improvements in digital technology as well. And I think in terms of that complexity around it, I suppose, as we've already talked about, that will also link to some of the challenges and complexities around equal pay and grading and how those two are related. I think those will probably be as well the reason why. So I think in the audit report it's marked as partially complete, and I think obviously that interdependency will be a factor, I suppose, in that March 2027 timing.
I mean, just an observation, I suppose it's clear from your report that the council has identified some cross-cutting strategic workforce things it wants to do. You mentioned the youth employment strategy, so I presume that the need to think about youth employment is now embedded in all these different strategic plans, and those decisions are being made in the light of the fact the council has set a strategy around wanting to do more youth employment. But I think, a standalone people strategy would help bring that all together clearly.
How it comes together, but I suppose just to provide that assurance that planning is happening.
And then finally, in terms of the questions I had on staff satisfaction, just really want a little bit of assurance. You talk in your section on staff engagement about the fact the council hasn't completed a council-wide employee survey since before the pandemic, and in the interim they've been using alternative engagement processes. You've already talked a little bit about it, the culture checklist that's been issued. Is that the proxy that the council are currently using to understand how employees in the organisation feel, where they might need to drive improvement in order to sustain and get good staff engagement? Have I understood that correctly, that they are now using that for that purpose?
So I'll bring in the team, but I think that the culture survey is very much around that culture piece. I think, although the council hasn't done a full employee survey, and I don't believe has any plans to do so at present, there are other ways in which the council is checking in on specific things, I suppose. So I think feedback on people project temperature checks, as mentioned, workforce diversity feedback. So I think there are other mechanisms, but I suppose again it's that council-wide approach that's missing. But to provide that reassurance that there are other.
That does reassure me, because having had a look at the culture survey, I thought, well, this can't be a proxy to cover everything you might want to do in engagement. So it's useful to know that isn't how the council are viewing it. That was me. Thank you, Andrew, on workforce questions.
So much, Jennifer. Anything else on workforce? Christine, did you?
Not really, no.
Anything specific on workforce now? Maybe just, was there anything more general that you wanted to ask before I draw the session to close, Christine?
Just generally on the subject of equal pay, the risks, the timelines associated with it. Just for clarification and transparency, are we going to be asking any more questions or gathering any more evidence in private? Because I do recognize the sensitivities around it. Just important we flag if we are in public session.
Yeah. I'm sure we will come back and when we get into the private discussion under item 11.
Okay.
We'll not be introducing any new evidence, but we may well discuss the issue further.
We will discuss it, I'm sure. My issue was around the evidence and particular questions anymore.
Okay, thanks, Christine. And Mike?
Well, it's just a sort of moving through this is that the top level are not together. Are you not concerned that that will actually make coherent decision making effective transparency and choices faced by the council?
Thanks, Eleanor.
Thanks, Stephen. I suppose my reflection on that would be that the annual audit report and then the controller of audit report, you know, they come at a point in time. I think what we've highlighted here, and we've discussed some of the recommendations and the complexity of the issues that are being faced and the interdependency of them. And I think actually when we're talking about the workforce, you know, recognizing that actually that workforce strategy and that interdependency with, you know, work on pay and grading, and then when we talk about the financial management, that interdependency with the finance system as well. And I think it's how, so I think, and Stephen will want to come in, but my observation would be, I think those interdependencies are recognised and there is an opportunity coming up, I think, to bring all of these things together, and that points to the, you know, that strategic medium-term financial strategic plan, setting out how all of that comes together as well. And I think there's that opportunity. Stephen.
And I think, Mike, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that's a really fair observation, and you can see that theme. It'll be interesting where it will be our thematic review for 25-26, what comes out of that, and whether we identify, you know, something similar in relation to that. So I think there are, as Helena says, an opportunity here to bring that together, to bring those matters together. Is it something that I'm concerned isn't recognised? No, I think that is recognised within the authority.
Okay, colleagues, I'm going to try and draw us to a close then. We have spent just over, I think, an hour and a half going over Glasgow City Council's Best Value report. I mean, I think that's right and proper, and as I think I said right at the start of the topic, I mean, it is the biggest council in Scotland. It faces many similar challenges to other local authorities, but a lot of them are obviously of a quantum that are significantly different from other local authorities. So it is right that we've given it a very full and detailed discussion. There clearly are, within the 6 themes we've discussed, some very significant issues that Glasgow is facing. And I'm really grateful to Helena, Stephen and Rachel for the time they've given us, not just in compiling the reports, obviously, but in responding to our many detailed questions this morning. So thanks very much to you three. Thanks to our colleagues on the Commission for helping me try and keep this roughly to time. That does draw this item 5 to conclusion. And as I hinted at in response to Christine's earlier point just a few minutes ago, the Commission will discuss in private under item 11 later in the meeting how it wishes to proceed going forward with the Best Value report for Glasgow City Council. I'll pause there and hand over the chair back to Joe, but thanks again to Helena, Stephen and Rachel.
Going here with me a few minutes. Okay, thank you all for that session. We're now into item 6, which is the local government policy update, and I hand over to Joe Chapman.
Thanks very much, Chair. Nothing really further for me to add. It's obviously been a summer period, which in some ways has been quieter. There's been a steady stream of various things. And of course, the main show in town is the political changes at a UK level. But yeah, I'll keep it nice and brief and just open straight up to members for questions.
Thanks, Joe. Questions for Joe? Angela, then Christine, then Carol.
Thank you. Thanks, Joe. As ever, a really good update on what's happening in government. I noticed in your report that there are changes at chief executive level in a number of councils, and before I commit my question, it's just worth, acknowledging that we would expect that all staff are treated in accordance with the agreed policies and procedures. But that to the side, I wonder if there's been any conversations or any opportunity through engagement with Scottish Government for some of these changes to be highlighted as opportunities for the forthcoming programme for government, and especially in light of the public service reform proposals that will be coming forward.
I'm not aware of any conversations of that nature. In terms of the three that are highlighted in the report, it's worth noting that only one of those is currently a vacancy, the Aberdeen one, and I know that the council have started their process for recruiting a replacement. So that's kind of where we're at with each of the three positions. But yeah, not aware of that being looked at in that way at this point.
Thanks, Angela. Certainly something worthy of us considering how we might throw our thoughts into the mix as public service reform creates opportunities. Christine?
Thanks, Jo. Thanks, Jo's actually. Thank you, Jo. As usual, I read through this and think, it's like a news bulletin of what's going on. And I'm always very grateful because I always find loads that I've missed in just generally looking around. However, and forgive me, colleagues and Jo, if I go off a bit of a tangent here, there's nothing in it about the two things that have significantly affected the area in which I live, which is in Murray and the Highlands, which is wildfires. So this time last year, there was a massive wildfire in the Dallamure. I got the train down from Aviemore yesterday where you could still see smoke rising. It's still on fire. It's not out yet. And the significant implication for the public sector bodies around supporting and organising that. So my question is, and it might not be for Jo, it might be for all of us in terms of work programme, how is that coordinated? Because for the people who live locally, it didn't seem to be coordinated at all. And the economic implications are huge, especially for the Aviemore and the surrounds during their peak summer break. So the public bodies involved, obviously we're involved with the Highland Council, community councils, but the other bodies like Scottish Fire and Rescue, the police, the Cairngorm National Park, Forestry and Land Scotland, the charities, RSPB, there doesn't seem to be any way that was coordinated centrally by Scottish Government.
I'm not sure we can say.
No, I'm not.
Anything about that, Christine. So
I'm not.
I think
That is my question.
I think there's a valid question in here.
Do we know?
I wouldn't want this stage to make any judgment as
No,
to
perhaps
those who are living, breathing it are doing their best. I think there's a valuable question to be added to our strategy session. If is this an area that we could legitimately?
I just wish. My point really is if the local communities could understand how it should be managed or could be managed.
I think legitimate questions to ask. I wouldn't want to suggest there's nothing going on.
No, I wouldn't suggest that at all because there's everything. There's been people there from all over Scotland helping to deal with it. So no, that's not my suggestion.
Carol?
Yeah, as always, a useful and interesting report. A couple of small questions. I notice in paragraph 18 that Perth and Kinross have obviously increased their council tax for empty properties, and that many of those are council properties. So their own policy is causing them cost. How significant is that cost in Perth? I don't know the balance of unlet properties there.
I don't know the figures. Obviously, that would be something that might be looked at as part of an audit. I would say that in the context of the council budget, it's likely to be fairly small cost, and of course, then you've got to balance that against the additional income that they're getting in from properties that the council don't own that are subject to that charge as well. So, yeah, I would say that I would think it's quite a small impact. I guess it was something that I noted as something that I hadn't really thought about, is the fact that when you have a charge like that, the property council itself are then going to be subject to that charge. Of course, it's one of those where it's partly around bringing in more revenue, but also partly around the policy intent around discouraging people from owning those additional homes which they're not using, and making them available for people who are looking for homes. So it's one of those where I think we've talked about things like zones and things like that, where it's actually about behaviour change as well as bringing in the revenue. If you're successful with it, the less revenue you bring in.
And then my next question is, in the visitor levy to Edinburgh, one of the things they're spending on is housing. And my thought was that was visitor levy was to be spent on things specifically for tourism. So I was quite surprised to see housing in there, and just if you can allude to.
If I recall correctly, the kind of rationale behind that was that by investing in housing, it was freeing up housing that's accommodations, such as B&Bs, hotels that are currently being used as temporary accommodation.
Okay.
So that would then be available to use for the tourism sector. It is a little bit of a sort of, there's a couple of points of connection there, but that was the rationale behind it.
And then my final one, and it's just a comment. I was surprised at the scale, 860,000 of unpaid council tax from council employees. Surprised.
Any other questions for Joe? Oh, sorry, Mike.
On the various responses to calls, to be voted scrutiny. What's the scope of calls? What is a those reform committees? So I wonder what broad the request was and how we're responding.
Yeah, so there's two calls out, two formal calls out at the moment. And the one that we have been working with Cognizant ABB on is around PSR. The questions are actually very, very specific, and they don't give a huge amount of scope to get into detail of the Commission's work. But what Joe and I have done is, where possible, we have where there's been commentary about a kind of general position or the Auditor General, we have also sought to put forward the Commission's position as well. The questions made that quite challenging, and what we have done is we've put our markers across that where we can. And I think Alison, who's been leading it, has, she was very much encouraging us to focus on the questions, and I think there will be time after this period for us to get into those discussions with those committees, especially, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, if Mr McKee, the Cabinet Secretary for PSR, wants to come to speak to the Commission. I think that's our opportunity. On the, the Social Justice, Housing and Local Government Committee, we met with the Clarks last Friday, and we've just gone back to clarify when the period for their pre-budget scrutiny starts. The committee is obviously, you'll appreciate, it's a completely new committee. Joe, you have a meeting next week with Mr Hoy, the convener. They haven't published yet anything formally, but we're hoping we might get a chance to provide oral evidence as part of the committee's first kind of tranche of work in advance of the budget.
Thanks, Joe. Then takes us to item 7, which is Chair's update. I want to point.
I stole you first.
I want to pick up 2 or 3 small items, but I'm happy to take questions on anything that's there. As Sarah's quite rightly said, I've got a first meeting with the chair of the convener of the Social Justice, Housing, Local Hoy, not next week. I've got an introductory meeting with the Deputy First Minister on the 23rd of September, subject to parliamentary business. And Andrew, you hosted the first session on our recruitment process last week, and I'm hosting the second one today, this afternoon. Some people in the room who are coming along, which would be good. It looks like we've got some good level of interest at this stage, which is good. But happy to take questions on anything, on any of that, or anything that's in the report itself. Okay. Takes us to a break. Okay, Emily, thank you again for coming along. It's a really important topic that you've taken us into debating once a year. I think we'll have a really good discussion around the table. we've come up with a variety of different questions, variety of different perspectives, which is always a good thing too. And the purpose of the exercise is for us to get some understanding from you as to how well LGBF is working, how well it's actually helping improve performance, how much it's being developed or where it might be developed. Yeah. So maybe can I kick off with, there's such a lot in the report, you can almost get lost in it a little bit. So it's a bit like, how should I read it as a lay reader, as to the extent to which I can be assured that local authorities are using this vast data set to help improve performance? How do we use it as a way of not economic regulation, but of who's doing really well and how's that informing those well, and who's not doing so well as helping use the information to. Is there something you can help us understand how those debates get played out as a consequence of this data set?
Maybe I'll start, and then Emily is the genuine expert in the room will come in behind me. But I think we quite often talk about what the local government benchmarking framework is and what it isn't. So it's a high level benchmarking tool in the sense that the report, for all that it's a lengthy document and a bit of a read, is no more than a kind of an introduction to that. So we always use the phrase a can opener. This is it's the framework is a way you kind of open the lid to lots of things that lie underneath, some of which sit within the framework, some which don't sit within the framework. And I suppose for us, from the from our perspective, it's really important that the data is considered around, and it's really important to have a real understanding both of the sector and of any individual council. You need to combine this with other areas of knowledge about particular councils, particular challenges. We were just touching briefly in our conversation about the position with homelessness in Glasgow, for example, which is a huge factor, but it doesn't sit within the framework as it currently stands. So it is one of the issues we're looking at in terms of the development of the framework. So it's a partial view of a complex system. I suppose what I'd like to think about the report is it gives people a really good starting point for getting into that deeper investigation. And you'll all remember that the report is quite substantial. It used to be much bigger. And I think it was a general reason for relief and celebration when we cut it back a bit. And I'm always interested in feedback about what is most useful, given the status of that document, and given what it's for. Does the current scale and content feel about right? I think for those that are involved in the day-to-day basis, probably yes. But the idea of the general reader is an interesting one, and I still think it's really difficult to engage the general public in government benchmarking because their interest tends to be service specific, patient specific, and perhaps to preempt a later question into a disgruntled audience. Well, actually, this service is in the top quartile. Doesn't really help very much in terms of having contentious discussions about the future service provision. Emily, if something to
I guess I would just add that the national report has till now very much focused on what we say at a national level. So, and we've always pointed to the local reporting is where you get that much more granular understanding around about the progress that councils are making against the minority areas and that kind of deeper understanding. So up to this point, certainly that's the separation that we've taken. And so we've not attempted to use the report to tell a story about individual councils or which councils are doing more. As again, I said, as it is. And to do that, because it's not a simple narrative, and it would be misleading to try and present that as a simple.
Can I perhaps be slightly controversial then? Because if I am the lay reader, I am a community member and wondering about my services in my community, and I'm looking at what's happening in Falkirk and what's happening in Manningshire, and I'm seeing different positions taken. Should I, as a Falkirk council taxpayer, be happy or unhappy with that? And should I be seeing improvements as a consequence of bringing those two together and you driving your priorities as a consequence? I mean, it's a bit like there's an army of people collecting data, a lot of data being stored. How much is it actually changing performance?
I mean, this is a question we spoke about a few years ago now at the Benchmarking Framework Board, and it's really informed the strategy as we move forward. Because I mean, it historically, probably not quite right, but historically it was something that was made available to council, but it wasn't something where the board, we were using it to try and drive sector-led improvement, and that's where the change is now, and that's where the change has been over the last number of years. And the work on your collaborative improvement is a particular example of that. And I suppose that's still in its relatively early stage. I think there's a lot of value in it. So the first example of that in relation to Scottish Welfare Fund, Falkirk was the host, because actually our performance historically had been good. It fallen away quite significantly over a relatively small number of years. It was a well-led service, had a really good transformational service lead there. So actually bringing in other councils who are performing better as a means of understanding what we needed to change was incredibly valuable. And when we did that, performance shifted again pretty quickly. So I think as a chief executive, if you're driven about performance improvement, if you're concerned, even embarrassed about relative performance, and you want to get to make improvements, and using the framework as a starting point for that is really important. And work, in particular, in your collaborative improvement has been really good in that regard. I think the other thing that's been really important is actually the Accounts Commission putting it as part of the direction. Because if there were councils who really weren't using it or not using it very much, or were in the very early stages of it, the fact of the direction just is a bit of a game changer in that regard. So that feels to me like it's been a really important aspect. And I remember years ago talking about the benchmarking framework at Solace meetings, and you could tell who was kind of with you and perhaps those that weren't. I think that's changed, and I think it was changing anyway. The different folks in local government and the agreed approach to sector-led improvement. But in fact, the Accounts Commission saying, well, actually, this is part of the direction, I think has been really important.
Conscious you've got a presentation, but I'm also conscious we've all read the report and we've got lots of questions. So I don't know whether do you want to use your presentation as a further insight into it, or do you want to just take questions around the table?
Well, just to say, in terms of the presentation, we're not really going to talk about the report.
Okay.
We're going to talk about our strategic priorities, where we're trying to move things on, so that it might be helpful in terms of answering questions. We'll try and keep it relatively brief. And Emily's voice been a bit. Yeah, okay, I'm encouraging her to keep her part relatively brief. So these are the key messages from the overview report. I know we've already considered that in earlier meetings. We won't revisit that in detail. I suppose if I was just going to say something on the back of the largely self-evident points in that slide, 24-25 data shows that the challenge facing local government is increasingly one of sustainability. There's no lack of commitment or effort or innovation within the sector. But we see this, and you'll see this when you're looking at particular councils, real challenges around about sustaining particular services, growing risks to long-term resilience, and areas, hopefully, about health and social care where the pressure really is is pretty unrelenting. So we'll just move on. That's the overview report. But let's talk about our priorities and the work that we're trying to do. So I think it was last year we shared the strategic priorities for our kind of next phase, 25 to 28. These are the areas we're looking at. Well, we've got a slide for each of them, so we'll go through these in turn. But I suppose, and I've touched on this already, it's the point about what the LGBF is and what it is and what it isn't. So it's high level, it's a can opener, it's not a league table. It's this issue about the data being considered in the round. And I think that, you know, the other issue in Scotland, which is so evident, is the difference between councils. Because you've been looking at Glasgow, and actually compare Glasgow, Clackmannan, issues around about demographics, issues around about rurality and deprivation, socioeconomic differences are so stark that this can never be more than a starting point for understanding that variation, and that requires local knowledge, it requires local context, and it requires wider evidence. So it's a partial view of a complex system, but we think it's a very important partial view, nonetheless. So move on again, just to talk a bit about where we're focusing on sector-wide improvement. Peer collaborative improvement, we think, is a really important part of that. So along with the framework itself and self-evaluation, peer collaborative improvement is a way of us working as a self-improving system. As I said, the example in Falkirk was a really important one for us. So we had pilots on the Scottish Welfare Fund, also on Housing Voice. So we're now looking to apply this to a wider range of corporate and service areas. We got new pilots which we're starting, and these are really testing different pathways into improvement activity. So the first one is about council-led collaborative improvement. So we've got a pilot starting in East Lothian, hosted by them, about information governance, and that's about using self-evaluation and peer challenge to identify improvement opportunities and share learning. Then we've also got peer collaborative improvement, which is informed by audit and scrutiny finding. And the pilot there is on asset management. And of course, that's been a recent focus, and that's been hosted by Dumfries and Galloway Council, again, looking to bring in other authorities who have made more progress, who are in a stronger position to move that one forward. So we're testing these different pathways into improvement activity, how self-evaluation, and peer challenge, and external assurance can open up more adherent improvement system. We are still at a relatively early stage. I think there's an interesting challenge about how you manage volume. But these are quite intense pieces of work. You know, I think in the ideal scenario, we'd be improvement service and partners would be in and amongst every council. Every council will have its area where peer collaborative improvement would be a good thing to do. But the capacity within the system to do that, I think, is a challenge. That's something we might want to talk about more. Just very briefly on national self-evaluation frameworks, this is work being taken forward by the Improvement Service. What we're trying to do is ensure that the local government benchmarking framework is formal and core evidence source within that. So building LGBF into annual performance health checks and corporate overviews, and promoting it as a means of challenging, providing a kind of an external check on self-evaluation. So, we do a piece of self-evaluation. We feel that we've got a strong story to tell there. Well, is LGBF telling us the same story, or actually is it providing some contrary evidence or helping us to identify gaps. And so there's a whole thing about making benchmarking and LGBF a standard element of self-evaluation, strengthening the link between self-evaluation and improvement by positioning the peer improvement work very much in the centre of that. And then the last point we've already covered really, we see you as our allies in this work, and the direction is really important. I'll come to Emily just to pick up on a few other things.
So in terms of the timeliness, this has always been one of the priorities of stakeholders, is to keep pushing for most effective timeliness we can deliver. And so we continue to release the data on a monthly basis, which just allows us really to make the data available to our stakeholders as soon as that data is published. So I think that's a huge step forward. That makes this data set much more dynamic. However, what we see is the more transformational changes in timeliness will come about through development of the local government data platform. I'll say a little bit about that later on. So if I move on from that one, thank you. So I wanted to talk a bit about the work that we're doing to, develop some of the areas within the framework. We recognise that some of the areas have some really important gaps in terms of the story that local government is trying to tell. So the board has focused in on some priority areas where the gaps are most important. There's scope here to do much more, but for this period, we're focusing on a small number of areas. Adult social care, I'd say, is probably our most important priority. There's recognition that the current suite is complete, partial and incomplete. And so we have been working with Social Work Scotland, Health and Social Care Chief Officers to really look at, well, where are the themes? What are the themes where we need that stronger picture and that stronger narrative? So understanding demand, unmet need, for example, a clear understanding about services for not just older people, but people with learning disabilities, mental health, substance use, dementia care in the community. There's a number of groups that are really important in terms of the work that councils do or partnerships do, and the demands that are simply not currently reflected. So these are some of the areas we're looking at. We also include transitions from children's services to adult services. We recognise that's one of the main focuses here is we really want to develop the understanding around about the pressures, not just the activity, so that kind of more rounded picture is kind of saying. So it's a really important piece of work. Within that, we're also looking at the more whole system approach. Yes, we're looking at, for example, housing and homelessness as well, but we're recognising that actually that we need to take a look across the service boundaries in order to really come up with a suite of measures that's relevant and useful there. So as you can imagine, the interconnections between homelessness, adult social care and workforce are very strong. So the partners we're working with on that are really recognising those. In housing and homelessness, we talked a bit before about homelessness as one of the priorities. We also want to look at housing supply, recognise that that's a gap at the moment, and housing need. So something more about the demand for housing, because there's nothing, and something a bit about the asset and the condition of our housing stock. In terms of workforce, we wanted to look at a broader picture of workforce sustainability. The framework at the moment is very limited in relation to workforce, and recognize what a key issue it is. So there's going to be more of a focus on recruitment, retention, succession planning, capacity, resilience, these kinds of themes as well. And we're also looking across the framework at those areas where we need stronger measures of effectiveness. We recognise there's some areas of the framework where there are measures of cost and measures of satisfaction, but there isn't something currently about performance effectiveness or outcomes. So an example of that would be leisure and physical activity. So we're working with COSLA and the sector to look at what would meaningful effectiveness measures look at there. Things like participation, health and prevention, for example, affordability, a number of things we're looking at. So just to kind of flag that up, that these are really important areas of work, and we will deliver upon them in the next year or so in order to actually include building momentum. So I hope this relates a little bit more to some of the points that you were making earlier around about how are we seeing evidence that councils are actually making use of this data to drive improvement. So in my view, absolutely, we are seeing that evidence, and the work we're doing is to try and surface that evidence and then share that evidence in order to support learning and practice sharing. So these are some of the ways that we're doing that. And but we're definitely seeing evidence of progress in terms of councils moving from simply reporting the data to using the data, whether it's in decision making, whether it's in self-evaluation, for example, or improvement planning. And we're going to continue our work to surface more and more evidence around that. But certainly some of the use cases, you may have seen them already. If not, we'll certainly share them with you afterwards. We're seeing evidence, for example, of how councils are using the data to support financial decision making, how they're taking the data and are often implementing it with other information in order to inform budget decisions, to assess impact around about some of the savings that they have delivered over previous years, and also to have more informed conversations around about affordability. So we're definitely seeing more and more evidence of that progress. And we're also seeing evidence of that moving away from the league table, as Kenneth was saying, where people are more, I guess, mature or sophisticated in the way they're using the data. They're combining it with other local intelligence to provide a much richer picture of what's going on locally. And it's allowing them to understand demand and to combine the picture in terms of what they're delivering and what the demand picture is, to understand the gap and to then look at what they need to do to address that. So that goes back to that sense that although the data is partial, it provides a great starting point to support those processes. And we're seeing evidence of how councils are doing that. What we would say is that a lot of the feedback we're getting is that it's supporting much better conversations and much better questions. And then in terms of the LGBF events, I'm just flagging this up because we think this is a really important step forward in the recent year, and we probably want to promote it more, and we need to think more about how we might do that. I mean, we've run 12 events in the last year, there's 15 in the current calendar, and it's delivered more than 30 case studies just during that period in terms of sharing practice and sharing improvements. And it's really providing a growing mechanism to support sector-led improvement and collaboration. So I think that's a really important element as well. One last slide. Thank you. And so here, I guess we just wanted to flag up that the LGBF board continues to really drive forward those sector-led improvements to modernise the data reporting and the data landscape. And the LGBF continues to be at the heart of that. But round about that, it includes, for example, that wider work we were looking to develop around the local government data. And that was the intention of that is all about supporting local government to derive richer insight and greater benefit from the data they're already generating. And the update around that is there is a sector-wide LGDP bid that's gone into Invest to Save, which would support the initial development and implementation of the platform, and then local government have in principle provided agreement that they would then carry the running costs forward. We are currently still waiting for a decision on that bid at the moment, and we'll certainly provide. In terms of all the other developments,
on this page, what they really represent is, if you like, the building blocks to that in modernising the data reporting landscape. So they're all important and valuable in their own right, but they all provide that building blocks to the larger vision. And I would say that the aim for all of them is really about creating more capacity, both locally and nationally, to make use of the data, to support those conversations, to drive making. At the moment, too much capacity is going on, that kind of manual aspect of collecting, reporting and gathering. We want to free up capacity to actually use the data, and that's really what all of this workers have found. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but I won't win.
That's great. Thanks, Emma. You've triggered all sorts of questions from me. I've spoken about sport. I know colleagues have got other questions, so I'll open the floor to questions for Emily or Kenneth. Angela.
Well done again. It's the, I mean, this has been ongoing for years, and it is great to see how it has been refined and adapted. So I mean, I think we've got a lot of questions, but a couple of points. Well, you mentioned the peer review, Kenneth. So the Welsh model's pretty sophisticated, pretty mature, and I just wonder to what extent we're learning from that and the way that they do that in a really cost-effective way. So that would be one thing. A second question was about, I read the stand out that sickness absence is, you know, a colossal drain on productivity and resources. Now, I may be wrong here, but it used to be that it was the only national policy that remained after single status. I'm not sure if it's moved on since then. But is there any notion that looking at that policy might collectively might be something that the government could do to try and address some of the pressures on the budgets? And I suppose my final one is really how you feel some of this is influencing the national agenda. So there's a lot happening, like affecting the programme for government, the public service reform agendas at the top of everybody's mind. So to what extent could the Commission take assurance that this is really featuring large in some of those debates?
I'm going to give Emily the chance to talk about the Welsh model, and I'll give you a bit of thinking time down.
So yeah, we've been really interested in the Welsh model, and we have been working with our colleagues in Wales, and they've been learning from us as well, because our approach is different from what they're doing. Their focus is more on a kind of corporate self-assessment, which obviously involves senior leaders across councils and that external input as well. Our focus to date has more focus on services. So it's been working with services to look at how they learn from other services. So we are very interested in their approach and that corporate approach. We think that there's a real opportunity to build on the introduction of the National Self-Evaluation Framework, because that also has that focus on a corporate overview. And we think that that provides a really strong platform then for peer learning. So that's the direction that we're looking at, and we're very keen to continue to learn from the Welsh model. We know that they're involving some colleagues from Scotland in some of their external, I think you call it that, their external review as well. So yes, we're very interested.
Hey, just thinking about the national agenda, I mean, we're all very interested to see what comes out in the programme for government about PSR. I think in a way, from a local government perspective, we feel pretty unsighted on that, because of course the strategy that came out last year was relatively silent on local government. So whilst I know that there's a great deal of interest, for example, in some of the shared services work that's going on, I think that in terms of if we're asking the question, are government looking at what's in LGBF as a means of informing? I don't really think they are. And I suppose the thing that occurs to me is when the Verity House agreement there's talk about having a set of indicators that local and central government could use in order to track progress. And I suppose the reaction of some of us was, well, wait a minute, we've got a set of indicators already. Let's not have even more indicators and evaluation information. Let's focus in on what we've got. So I remain to be convinced that it's got that kind of traction. So I think it's got much greater traction within local government. I think that the Accounts Commission position helps with that, but I'm not particularly optimistic on that score. And my expectations in relation to what it says about local government in the programme for government in relation to PSR are I think relatively low as well, because I think the indications are unclear. And the other thing that's worth saying is that Emily referred to the bids that have gone in, the Invest to Save bids that have gone into government, which we've been awaiting a feedback on for quite some time. I think whether there is support for that data platform work is going to be indicative of whether there is support for the kind of the broader piece of work we're talking about here. And alternatively, if it goes into more specific pieces of work happening at council level, I think that will indicate a slightly different priority. In terms of sickness absence, and I know, Angela, you'll know much more about this than I do in terms of the collective position. And there's a difficulty, I think, to be a challenging from unions if we go into that wider review of policy. I think there's a lot we can still do locally, and actually I look at that certainly from a Falkirk perspective, from a kind of Invest to Save point of view, because our experience, if you bring in additional resource to focus in on some of the most challenging cases round about sickness and absence, you can make a real difference. And just by having that, if the organisation and if people know that the organisation is focusing in on that as an issue, it makes a difference. So, for example, as an organisation where our teacher sickness has always been really low, our broader workforce sickness is significantly higher. That's the kind of approach we're taking locally, saying, okay, we're getting additional resource because we know that, particularly in relation to areas like health and social care, we're all looking to bring in agency staff and this sort of thing. That actually, if you focus in on that, you can make a real difference. So my thinking of that has been more using LGBF to then promote local action rather than a national framework.
Then Carol.
I was just interested in the impact of unmet in areas like adult social care and using home. I imagine that is quite difficult to capture, but also think it's quite important the narrative in terms of these major areas. It's also going to have an impact on satisfaction levels when there's unmet needs. Is that captured in any way? Are there plans for that and challenges around that potentially?
Yeah, so I think you're right, we recognise that we need more information on that within our wider suite. So that's exactly what the colleagues are talking about, is help us understand more funding areas. Is very important for the narrative. Like you say, it will impact on a whole number of different interconnections again. So I would just say, no, it's not currently represented, but it is part of our programme of work. So I hope next year when we come back, we'll be able to say, here's what the new data is showing us within the framework.
Just on that, I mean, in terms of the link with satisfaction, well, once we perhaps can't demonstrate that at framework level, we all know that to be the case. An awful lot of dissatisfaction in our communities is about what's not happening, what isn't provided, or about the state of the environment and therefore what's perceived as being not done or not sufficiently well. And I think we see a lot of dissatisfaction complaints activity flowing precisely from that.
Something part of the picture, doesn't it? Can measure and what's happening. There's a whole lot of things that are not happening, and that can constrict even more sharply, I think, in the coming years. So it's a slight worry and concern if we cannot capture when we stop doing things, or there's impact of that. How do we capture that and gather it and then back on it, understand the implications of these restrictions and the lack of funding to deliver certain services?
I think that's right. I mean, it doesn't prevent us from acting, particularly in health and social care partnerships across the country. The issues around about unmet need are front and centre of the considerations because of the challenges that's driving in terms of flow through the system, blockages, all this kind of stuff. And I think as councils, we need to use what we know about community dissatisfaction to then invest in some of these areas which will make a difference. And I think a lot of that, my view, is around about place. People look out in their communities and they don't feel like places are being invested in.
Thank you. I welcomed your focus on health and social care and the different measures. What I noticed was absent from that. We know that the ASN audit kind of talked about that the measures are just not appropriate to answer the questions for. It's too broad to say 70% of people have an ASN need, but what does that actually mean? Considering that feeds into workforce and considering that that's one of the biggest spends of councils, plan for that to be also be a focus, and when would that be?
Can I just check, do we mean additional support needs for children, or is it children and adults, or?
Additional support needs for children in schools being 70%, but the number's not all disability. And we couldn't drill down on the teacher needs because we couldn't just unpick that 70% number.
So this is we've got 6 priorities, and I only gave 4 just because of time, but yes, it is included, and we've been working with ADES in particular and flagged up national work that's taken place around about a framework for additional support needs. And so we're looking to be informed by the work that's taking place with ADES, Scottish Government Cause Lighting, around about additional support needs to help inform what our particular focus is on that area. We recognise it's something we need to reflect, given, as you say, the growing importance, but also our lack of insight on what's actually happening. Additional interest also relates to then the transitions for these children into adult services as well. So we are particularly interested in that as well. So yes, definitely we agree. We think that's a really important area, and it is included in our plan.
And then another question I had, and it was just maybe just the way you said it. You said if people self-evaluate the local government benchmark framework, it will be an external check. But if they're self-evaluating, how's that an external check? It's maybe just, did I pick you up wrong?
It's basic. So in terms of self-evaluation, whether it's a national self-evaluation framework or models like PISA, for example, they're based on councils using a framework to self-assess how they're performing and where the areas for improvement are. And what we're positioning LGBF is that it provides that external check. Sorry, excuse me. It provides an external check to complement those individual assessments of staff, for example, on how they view their services in terms of areas for improvement and strengths. Sorry, I've maybe not explained that very well.
Okay, so you've got other people also assessing it, not just the self-evaluation.
So a self-evaluation means that the council is
doing it themselves.
That's right. Sorry.
Yes, that's why I didn't see the external check if they're doing it themselves.
I see what you mean. So basically, they're doing the self-assessment, but the LGBF, if you like, is a neutral evidence base, that it's not based on subjective assessment of how the service is performing. It provides that kind of neutral, autonomous, objective data that will allow the council to just cross-check, do their views of the service match with what the actual data tells them about their service. I'm sorry, I didn't explain that very clearly.
Andrew?
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Kenneth and Emily, for the report and the presentation. You're right, Kenneth, it is much shorter still than 3 or 4 years ago, which I really welcome. Kenneth, I think you mentioned it as well. I think I heard you say, you did say you very much welcomed the inclusion of the indicators in the SPI direction and so on. And I think you said it was a game changer. So I'm just wondering, and I had a more general question along these lines anyway. I mean, is there something else the Commission, as the Commission, a single entity, could be doing to raise the sort of profile and constructive usage of the indicators beyond inclusion in the indicators, inclusion in the SPI directive, and sort of linked to that, I guess. I mean, we can't obviously, unfortunately, directly the Scottish Government, but is there anything we can be doing in terms of influencing? Because I think you alluded to an answer to Angela's question, the reticence about anything significant coming out of the programme for government in this regard, Kenneth. I mean, is there anything that we, not just that the Commission could do to raise the usage and the constructive profile of indicators, but is there anything we can be doing to press the government specifically on? We've got, in effect, a new government, chair and vice chair are meeting various people just now for the first time in current roles. And so there's an opportunity potentially there. Will they listen? That's an open question. But just wondering if there was anything you felt we could do or we could pass on to the government through our upcoming contacts to try and raise it further, the profile and constructive usage of the indicators. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the inclusion of the direction gave a kind of clarity of relation to LGBF, which was and is being widely used as a sector. It was a game changer because it removed the element of doubt.
Yeah.
It removed the element of doubt. From the board point of view, that felt really significant. And I can't think of another action that would have a kind of similar impact. So I suppose for me, it's more about maintaining that line of arguments. I mean, I think that the Accounts Commission takes a pretty strong view on a whole series of topics, and it gets noticed. And I think if you're when you're in discussions with government, I suppose it's about re-emphasizing the strength of what's in place and using that in terms of further development. I think there's always a tendency, and I mentioned the Verity House Agreement, to think that we need something new, whereas often what we need is the improvement of what we've got. And we've talked about how we're trying to make this more effective and having a greater impact and helping to improve services. And I think sometimes that's not an easy message to get through. But if we're seeing it from a local government perspective and you're seeing it from a Accounts Commission perspective, then I think it's more likely to carry some weight and make some difference.
Well, that's really helpful. Thanks very much.
As Sarah's rightly pointed out to me, it's also included in our updated code. So
yeah,
we are taking this very seriously.
Yes, indeed.
Some of us have challenges about the capacity and capabilities of some of the data that we want to use. That can be for another day. Mike and then Jennifer.
I think in turn Andrew's question the other way around, which is given that we are pushing, strongly supporting you do for us, as it were. And I'm particularly interested in this trying to get from 100 and however indicators to some indicators that might give you an overall sense of performance. I was very struck by what you said about that's what the House Agreement. So I suppose it's a challenge as to are there indicators or composite indicators or ways of actually getting that overall. Second thing, is the sort of performance and maybe the outcome indicators and funding. I think it's easy to understand that there is no arithmetic relationship. There are lots of other factors that might affect what you spend. But it's again a question of looking in a more sophisticated way. What you can say about those relationships. I was struck by what you were saying. You can the indicators relate to each other, and you reach an outcome. You may actually in that sort of richness of analysis. Activity that and I recognize that's another word. Those feel like the things which are going to be really fundamental.
I mean, it's a pretty challenging question, a pretty challenging area, one perhaps we've always wrestled with to a degree. In a sense, of course, it was the challenge wasn't made clear in the context of Verity House that to have a set of relatively small number of indicators that give you that comprehensive sense of performance. It's extraordinarily difficult. I think it'd be difficult in any context, but it's particularly difficult in a context where variation in 32 councils is so great.
Peers, so you've actually got them into peer groups.
We have.
They accepted that there are similarities and differences.
Yes.
Within the similarities, there must be ways of saying that group deserves this set of indicators to be able to show performance for that peer group. And I'm struggling with this number of indicators, and you've already talked about adding to them. How on earth do we really give it a real boost by saying these are the key ones we think as a commission are the critical ones? I would like you to tell us why you think those are the right critical ones, and then use them. That number of, as I said before, there's an army of people collecting that data and managing it. Do you have data analysts analysing it? Do you have economists looking at the correlations and coefficients to see whether they're robust or not? There's a lot to go in there without adding the list of indicators. I think it's really, really valuable, but you have to tell us because we can't tell you. But adding to the number of indicators isn't improving your case for these are a robust set of indicators to show performance, to show you value for money, and to show how they're learning to improve over time.
I mean, adding to the number of indicators is about trying to have a more comprehensive.
How many more do you need? I mean, a comprehensive picture of what, Kenneth?
You
can add to the cows come home.
I think it's like Emily was saying about the gaps. Emily, I think you described it nicely to me that there's some areas that actually there's some professional groupings would say, actually just leave our area, just take our indicators out. Okay. But actually it's about, no, we're not taking them out because we need something that reflects the current service delivery model more effectively.
Absolutely. And in addition to that, there's also the element that a good practice principle in terms of how we see use of the LGBF locally, which ultimately is what it's designed for, is to be used locally by individual councils, is that flexible use of the framework, is that they draw from the framework, they choose those indicators that are relevant for them. So exactly as you're saying, that subset of indicators, what we're seeing more and more is councils doing exactly that. So even if we add to the overall basket, what that does is enables councils more and more to select that suite of indicators that has relevance to them locally. So that's been the direction that we've been travelling, is to support councils to do that rather than trying to do it at a national level, because I don't think we think at a national level it's particularly feasible or will provide a meaningful story.
Okay, I'm going to agree to disagree, but today's not the point to discuss that, okay? Because I do think there's a really useful data in there, but I think there's too many indicators from the point of view of allocating scarce resources and identifying priorities and informing improvements across that suite. It's almost you can use the data to hide. It's the hiding behind it. I've got my own suite, so I'm not worrying. Is the issue for me that is we're wanting assurance that self-evaluation is going to actually pick up performance over time improvement. Yeah. Conscious of one more, Jennifer, and then we might have to call it. This is a can opener, most definitely.
Yeah, I mean, that's a debate I'd be really interested to take forward. It's an important one, but it's not at all straightforward.
Agree.
And you don't necessarily doesn't necessarily a problem with having more indicators, so long as you have a coherent way of looking at
It's the extent to which they've got the capacity, capabilities, and finance to keep them going. That's the challenge for me. You've got a scarce resource. Which is the best use of that scarce resource in something like this?
I mean, that's where the data platform is really easy. But there was a previous comment you made about, do we have data analysts and economists and people looking at it? And I think that the resource will vary hugely between councils, and for a very small council, this will be a team, but it could be a team of one person who's really working stuff. So every service will be concerned about performance, but actually that central resource, which historically has been squeezed over the last 10, 15 years because it's more easily squeezed than others. So whereas on the other hand, I know that, for example, in Glasgow, as part of the city deal, that they've got a kind of an intelligence unit, which is probably invaluable in terms of that kind of insight.
Jennifer.
Something Emily said I wanted to pick up on, if I may. I mean, just you mentioned, one of my questions was about how are councils really using this, particularly in relation to budget setting? And you said, Emily, that you are seeing evidence of that. And I think I'd be really interested if you feel comfortable to just expand, because I guess to Joe's point about sort of doesn't matter how many indicators you have, but actually are people using them to inform decisions, and are better decisions coming out of having this resource available? So I'm really interested if there's something else you can share on the kind of examples you're seeing.
We're definitely seeing growing evidence. It's an area of growing focus for us to work with finance colleagues to look at how they're working within the councils to use this data. And I would say that's a relatively new in that we've always had performance colleagues making lots of use of the data, but it's more recently developed that we're getting our finance colleagues, our finance partners, business partners to actually utilise the data and work closely with services to actually understand, interrogate, combine with other intelligence. I think that's a really important element with the finance, not just taking the indicator, but really understanding what are the different aspects of that indicator, what are the different elements, and you need the finance colleagues to then be able to break down which aspects are the factors that are driving, whether it's increasing costs, whether it's reducing costs. So as well as the case studies which we can share, we've also done some tailored work with councils around about this as well, where we've got a finance group, and we've brought them in to work with the councils, where they've brought together their services and their finance colleagues to really interrogate the data, to break it down, to better understand what's driving the levels that they're seeing, and to then look at where are the real opportunities here to actually prioritise improvements or savings or efficiencies. So it's been a really positive area of work, and I would say that we're definitely seeing some really
that just feels really encouraging in terms of our constant message around financial sustainability, to really start to see how councils are using this data and finance teams are using this data to sort of feed into that agenda. So thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. I think the last question, Ruth.
I think it's quite a quick question, but I just wanted to ask about the data platform, because there was mention about things like data quality and timeliness, but I'm wondering, will it also help stakeholders use that data in different ways that are more accessible for like elected members looking at data and making judgments? Like, is that going to be an element of a platform that's a bit more sophisticated about how people can surface the information,
so
the thinking behind
and
it?
it allows them to really look at information that there's so much out there, and at the moment it's really about improving accessibility, but yeah, a lot of the design work will be about identifying earlier around about some of the common themes people want to look at together and it makes it easier for them. So if you wanted to look at digital support for learning, for example, as a theme, it would then allow to pull all of the data that was in that set that was relevant and present it in a way that actually allowed you to understand what the
That would be quite a positive thing if that progressed. Yeah.
incredibly exciting.
Yes. Yeah.
Real opportunities.
Great. Thank you.
Can I just add to that? I think it is, I think the data platform is behaving in one observation again in my knowledge of this area might be a bit dated now is that there are multiple national data teams working across Scotland. And I know that you've mentioned earlier about putting in an investment. I'm just wondering what is happening within the sector to demonstrate that you're creating enough capacity from the existing resources that you've got that will then augment whatever you get from government, or did you need the money from government? Because this is a critical development.
So if you didn't get the money from government, what would happen?
Can't answer that today, but
Well, I mean, it certainly delays the process. I mean, for me, when the improvement service is doing some of the initial work around about the data platform, you know, the number of asks of data,
yeah, I think it was about individual.
You know,
Yeah.
the time taken to do that is extraordinary. And of course, the challenge from our point of view, our challenge to government is, well, what's been done with this data? And I suppose our suspicion was that quite a lot of data was collected for reasons which were historically justifiable, but actually no longer applied. So just to have that kind of rationalization of the system, rationalization, I suppose, first, and automation, would make an enormous difference, and means that actually the resource within councils is more focused on the challenges around about improvement, rather than the gathering and provision of information, which isn't necessarily well used. So I do think if that funding doesn't come through, I do think there's a kind of a fundamental ask for us about, well, where next we go on this, because I do think that it's really important just to have that sensible rationalization of what is an incredibly complicated and messy system.
Control of managing this meeting like last night.
Well, just to say again on the data platform, I wonder whether it would be a major failure if the government's public service reforms method did not have a very large data component. And I just want quite interested in your thinking about how far it's the funding for the data platform and how far it's, as it were, having the data platform as a component of the overall approach.
I mean, I think that there's a recognition at the Scottish Government level of the importance of getting issues around about data sorted out. So I think that will come. I suppose the challenge is quite an immediate one, in that there's an investor save fund, bids go in, and the bids usually exceed the volume of money available. So, and by its nature, this is quite a long-term piece of work. It's not quite when. So in a way, and this is simply a personal view, it wouldn't surprise me if the funding goes to things that are seen as being quicker wins for Scottish Government than the data platform. That's might well prove to be wrong in that. Anyway, I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, the feedback we've had from colleagues in Scottish Government is that this fits really well with their ambitions as well. And so it's been incredibly supportive in terms of, you know, this is part of their wider vision, and the local government is going to take this forward, then that really works for them too. So we certainly heard a lot of supportive noises, but yeah, it's just whether or not this particular fund comes through, I'm not sure.
And an ongoing practice doesn't necessarily tie in with that strategic narrative.
As I said at the end there, this is definitely a can opener. I know Blythe and Sarah, who sit on the board, have heard me ranting about how we can make best use of it and how we can understand the capabilities and capacities of what this data is. For a platform like that, you need to know the data quality is there. I'm pretty sure the data quality is an issue, needs to be resolved. But that's an ongoing piece of work too, I'm sure. I'll look to Blythe and Sarah to keep us informed of what's going on. I'll happily have offline conversations about how best to support what we can do in this, because I do think a data platform, and I do think effective data is the right way to go forward. Whether it's this data, I don't know. I'm candid with you, because there's so much of it. I wouldn't kind of how to get through the wood from the trees. Difficult to know. But I really want to be, we really want to be supportive of what you're trying to achieve here, Kenneth and Melanie. And I want to thank you for coming along again and enduring our examination yet again. Thank you
very much. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Really helpful. Thank you.
We are. Then for item 9, any other business? Is there any other public business members would like to raise today? On that basis, we will close the public session. Thank you. We can't press the leave button.